Live from Boston, Massachusetts, it's theCUBE, covering IBM Chief Data Officer Summit. Brought to you by IBM.
Welcome back to theCUBE's live coverage of the IBM CDO Strategy Summit here in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm your host, Rebecca Knight, along with my co-host, Dave Vellante. We're joined by Mark Lack. He is the Strategy Analytics and Business Intelligence Manager at Mueller, Inc. Thanks so much for joining us, Mark.
Thank you for the invite.
So why don't you tell our viewers a little bit about Mueller and about what you do there?
Sure. Mueller, Inc. is based in the Southwest, Ballinger, Texas to be specific, and I don't expect anybody, unless they Google it right now, will be able to find that city. But that's where our corporate headquarters and our main manufacturing plant has been. And we are a company that manufactures and retails steel building products. So if you think of a warehouse or a backyard building or even a metal roof, or even I was looking downtown or downstairs earlier today, this building is made out of big steel girders. We take those and form them into a product that a customer can use for storage or for living or for any of whatever their use happens to be. Typically it might be agricultural, but you also find it in very, very large buildings. Mueller is a retailer that happens to manufacture its products. Now, that's a very important distinction because the company, up until about 15, 20 years ago, viewed itself as a manufacturer that just happened to retail its products. And so when you take the change in the emphasis, your business changes. The way you approach your customers, the way you approach your products, the way you market yourself is completely different than from one side to the other. We've been in business since the 1930s, been around for a very long time. It's a family-owned business that has its culture and its success rooted in West Texas. We have 40 locations all over the Southwest. We're headquartered in Ballinger, Texas. We're as far east as Oak Grove, Louisiana, and as far west with locations as Albuquerque, New Mexico.
So you do cognitive analytics for Mueller. So tell our viewers a little bit about what you do there.
Sure. Mueller has always been on the forefront of technology, not for technology's sake, but really for effectiveness and efficiency's sake. So Mueller did business process reengineering when it was common for much larger organizations to do, but Mueller took it under as the reality of, for us to manage our business in the future, we need to have the professional tools enabled to be able to do this. So we set on in our industry using technology in novel ways that our competition just doesn't do. So with the implementation of technology, what you have is a lot of data that comes along. And so we've been very effective using it for our balanced scorecard to report metrics and keep the organization on track with that, giving information back to various parts of the organization, and then also creating an analytics platform and program that allows us to really dive deep into the organization and the data and everything that's being thrown off from our technology. So cognitive analytics, this is something, as you hear about in technology today, is from the robots to artificial intelligence. Cognitive analytics, I think, is for us a better way of looking at it, of augmented intelligence. We have all of this data, we have these wonderful systems that help give us information to give us the answers we need on our business processes. We have some predictive analytics that help us to identify the challenges going ahead. What we don't have is the deep dive into using these technologies of cognitive to take all of this big data and find answers to situations that it would take 100 people 100 years to find out, to be able to mine through. So the cognitive analytics is our new direction of analytics, and to be honest with you, it's really the natural progression from our traditional analytics system. So as I said before, we have the regular analytics, we have the predictive analytics. As we get into cognitive, this is the next generation of how do we take this data that we have that's coming at a volume and a velocity and a variety that is so difficult to look at as it is in a spreadsheet, and offload this onto a system that can help us to interpret, give us some answers that we can then judge and then make decisions from.
So, like you said, you have a lot of data. You have customer data, you have supply chain data, you have product data, you got sales data, retail, location data. What's the data architecture look like? I mean, some data is more important than other data. How did you approach this opportunity?
So, when a few years ago I went to the first World of Watson, which was in New York. There was about 1,000 attendees, and Ginny Rometty had this great presentation, and it was very inspiring, and she asked, what will you do with Watson? And at the time, I had no idea what we were going to do with Watson. And so I sat on the plane on the way back, and I thought through what are the business case scenarios that we could use to use artificial intelligence in a steel building company in Ballinger, Texas. Don't forget the irony of that part, is that we're going to go back and start using cognitive. So I thought through this, and I went to our owner, and we had many conversations on cognitive. You had the Jeopardy, the Watson championship, and you started thinking about all of these systems. But the real question was, how could we take a new technology and apply it to our existing business to make a difference? And I'm getting to the answer to your question on how it got to the structure. So we went down the path of investigating Watson, and we've realized that the cognitive is part of our future. And so we plan on leveraging cognitive in many ways. We'd like to see it in sales effectiveness, operations effectiveness, transportation effectiveness. There are all sorts of great ideas that we have. One of the challenges we have, and the reason I'm here at the CDO Summit, is when we start to look at our data, the question is, are we cognitive ready? And I'll be honest to you, we are for today for a sliver of what cognitive capability is. As you've always heard the numbers, 80% of your data is in unstructured format. So we have lots and lots of unstructured data. We have a lot of structured data. When it comes to the analytics around our structured data, we're pretty good. But when you start talking about unstructured data, how do we now take this to add to our structured data and then have a more complete picture of the problem that we're searching? So what I'm hoping to gain here at the CDO Summit is talking with some of these world-class leaders in data operations and data management to help understand what their pain points were, learn from them, so I can take that back and help to architect what our needs are so that we can take advantage of this entire cognitive future.
So you're pre-cognitive. So cognitive ready, let's unpack that a little bit.
Sure.
That means that what, you've got a level of confidence in the data quality, you've got a understanding how to secure it, govern it, who gets access to it. What does that mean to be cognitive ready?
So it's going to be all of those, all of the above. First is, do you have the data? And we all have data, whether it's in spreadsheets on our systems, whether it's on our mobile phone, whether it's on our websites, whether it's in our ERP systems. And
we got data.
I can keep all going. We have data, but the question is, do we have access to the data? And if you talk to some people, well, sure, you have access to the data. Just tell me what data you want, and I'll get you access. Okay? Well, that is one answer to a much larger problem, because that's only going to give you what you're asking for. What the cognitive future is promising for us is we may not know the questions to ask. I think that's the difference between traditional analytics and then the cognitive analytics. One of the benefits of cognitive will be the fact that cognitive will give answers to questions that were never asked. And so now that this happens, what do we do with it? When we start thinking about attacking a problem, being data ready, having the data there, that's part of the problem. And I think most companies think we're pretty good with our data, but with the 80% that we don't have access to, the real question is, are we missing that crucial piece of information that prevents us from making the right decision at the right time? And so our approach, and what I'm going to go back with, is understanding the data architecture that those who have gone before me, that I can pick up and bring back to my organization and help us to implement that in a way that will make it cognitive ready for the future. It's not just the access to the data, it's having the data. I had lunch a few years ago with Steve Mills, who was senior executive for IBM, and one of the people at lunch was bold enough to ask him, well, how do we know what data to capture? And he said, very bluntly, all of it. Now this was about 5 years ago. So back then, you're shaking your head saying, we don't have storage capabilities, we don't have the ability to store all this data. But he had already seen the future, and what he was telling us right then was, all of it's going to be valuable. So where we are today, we think we know what data is valuable, but cognitive is going to help us to understand what other data might be valuable as well.
So I'm interested in your job from the perspective of the organizational change. And you work for, as you said, a small family-owned company, smallish, a family-owned company. And we've heard a lot today about the business transformation, the technology involved, and how that has really changed dramatically over the last decade. But then there's also this other piece, which is the social and cultural change within these organizations. Can you describe your experience in terms of how your colleagues interpret your role?
You're asking me those questions because you can see the bruises from what I've had to accomplish. within an organization, one of the benefits of working that I found at Mueller, and it's a family organization, is that those who work there, and I've been there for 18 years, and I'm still considered a newcomer to the organization, right after 18 years. But we're not there unless we have a strong commitment to the organization and to the culture of the company. So while we may not always agree as to what the future needs to hold, okay, we all understand we need to do what's best for this company for its long-term survival. That's, at the end of the day, that's what we're there to do. So culturally, when you first come up with saying you're going to do artificial intelligence, you know, you get a lot of kind of head scratching, especially in West Texas. I have a hard time explaining even to those around me, you know, what it is that I do. You know, but once you start telling the story that we have data, we have lots of data, and that there might be information in that data that we don't know now, but in the future we may have. And so it's important for us to capture that data and store it. Whether or not we know that there's immediate value, we know there's some value. Okay, and if we can take that leap, that there's going to be some value, and we're here for the health of the organization, we know that there are challenges every organization faces. We're a steel building company in Ballinger, Texas, and I know I keep saying that, but what if a company like Uber comes up with a metal building, and all of a sudden we have new challenges that we never thought would face. Many organizations that have been industries that have been in an upheaval from these changes in either technology access or a new idea that splits the difference. We want to make sure we can stay ahead. And so when we start talking about that from a culture, we're here for the long-term value of the company. We're committed to this organization. So what do we need to do? And so, you know, the term out-of-the-box thinking is something that sometimes we have to do. That doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean that we all immediately say, aha, this is what we're going to do. It takes convincing. It takes a lot of conversation, and it takes a lot of political capital to show that what it is that we're going to do is going to make sense, and use a lot of good examples.
Well, and you kind of tongue-in-cheek about people rolling their eyes about AI and so forth, but any manufacturer sees 3D printing and the way it's evolved, goes, wow, and then the data that you can capture from that. So I wanted to ask you, when you talk to your colleagues and people are afraid that robots are going to take over the world and so forth, but what are the things that when you think about augmented intelligence, that, you know, where do the machines leave off and the humans pick up? What kinds of things do humans do in your world that machines don't do that well?
So, you know, if I go back and I think about analytics, for example, there's a lot of time collecting data, storing data, translating data, creating a construct to retrieve that data, putting that data into a beautiful report, and then handing it out. Think of all that time that it takes to get there, right? A lot of people who are in analytics think that they're adding value by doing it. But to be honest with you, they're not. There's no value in the construct. And so what the value is in the interpretation of that data. So what do computers do well, and what do we do well? We do well at interpreting what those findings tell us. If we can offload those transactions back to a machine that can set the data for us, automatically construct the data, put it into a situation for us that can then allow us to then interpret the results, then we're spending the majority of our time adding value by interpreting and making changes for the company versus spending that same time going back and constructing something that may or may not be something that may add value. So we spend 80% of our time creating data for a report. The report, now we have to test the report to determine, can I communicate this the right way? You have machine learning now, and you have tools that will then take this data and say, oh, this is numerical data, this looks like general ledger data, this is the type of way this data should be displayed. So I don't have to think of a graph, it suggests one for me. So what it does is then allow me to interpret the results, not worry about the construct.
So you can focus on the things that humans do well, but
That's right.
but we can't. But the other thing I want to talk to you about is the talent issue. I mean, as you've mentioned before that you're based in West Texas, and you are working in the real vanguard of an industry. As I said, you are someone who is thinking about whether or not Uber is going to say, let's make steel buildings. I mean, is that a problem that you're facing, that your company is facing?
Well, there's an old joke, right, that the factory of the future is going to have a man and a dog, and the man's job is to feed the dog, and the dog's job is to bite the man if he tries to touch any of the machinery, right? Okay. So I don't think that we're there. The jobs aren't going to be eliminated to where people are not able to add value. But finding the talent, back to your question, is the expectation that we have of talent, it is scarce. Finding people that have the skills to now interpret the data. So you can find people that have a lot of time that can do any of those steps in between. But now what's happened is you want people to add value, not create constructs that don't add the value. So the type of talent that you look for are people who can interpret this information to give us the better answers that we need for the organization to thrive. And that's really where I see the talent shifting, is on more forward-looking, outcome-based, value-based decision-making, not as much on the development of items that could be offloaded to a machine.
Yeah, I mean, interpretation, creativity, ideation, I mean, machines have always replaced humans. We've talked about this on theCUBE before, but the first time in human history, machines are replacing humans in cognitive functions. I mean, you gave an example of the workflow of developing a report, which
any company can relate to, yeah.
But yeah, and 10 years ago,
right.
that was like super valuable.
Right, right.
Today it's like, let's automate that.
Well, but the challenge I think where people have is, where do they add value? That's if we were to, what is the problem that we're trying to solve is, where do we add value? If we add value creating the construct, you aren't going to be employed because something else is going to do that.
Yeah.
But if you add value on focusing on the output and being able to interpret that output in a way that adds value to your company, you'll be employed forever. So people that can solve problems, take the information, make decisions, make suggestions that are going to make the company better, will always be employed. But it's the people who think they add value, flipping a switch or programming a lever. Now, they think their value is very important there, but I think what we have to do, and it behooves us, is to translate those jobs into, where do you add value? Where is the most important thing you need to be doing for the success of this company? And that, I think, is really the future.
We haven't asked any IoT questions
I know,
today.
it's so true.
Are you sort of digitizing, instrumenting, or your customers, the end products of what you guys produce, and how is that creating data?
We haven't. We've talked about it. We don't have products we're not selling things that are machinery that might break down or give us information, and so we're building final products that are there that people will then do different things with. So IoT hasn't worked for us from a product standpoint, but we are looking at our various machinery and making sure that we have understanding as to those events that are causing it to break down. We have all of one of the challenges we have in our industry is that if we have a line that manufactures a part, if it goes down, okay, now it shuts everything down.
Yeah, right.
So we have a duplicate, which can get very expensive if you have duplicates of everything. And how many duplicates do you need to have make sure you have duplicates of the duplicates? So if we can start to look at this data that's coming from our machinery and use that as a predictor, then we can use that, and so you have sort of an IoT thing there by looking at the data that's there. But is it feeding back into our normal reporting systems? It's not necessarily like it is from a smartphone or enabled like that.
No, but it's anticipating a potential outage and avoiding that. Yeah, great.
Well, Mark, thanks so much for coming on theCUBE. It's fun. It was a fun conversation.
Thank you.
I'm Rebecca Knight for Dave Vellante. We will have more from the CDO Summit just after this.